What happens when a comedian known for her wholesome charm meets one of television's most provocative hosts? Tonight, we dive into the confrontation that left Leanne Morgan walking off set and Andy Cohen scrambling for damage control. The stage was set for what should have been a lighthearted promotional interview. Leanne Morgan, the Tennessee-born comedian, had come to discuss her new comedy special, a celebration of family, motherhood, and small-town life. Andy Cohen, ever the playful provocateur, had prepared his usual blend of humor and controversy. At first, the exchange was warm. Andy welcomed Leanne with his trademark grin, teasing her about juggling a tour, a husband, and grown kids who still call home for laundry advice. Leanne laughed easily, charming as ever. But beneath the laughter, Andy's questions began to shift. "So, Leanne," he said, leaning forward with that familiar glint of mischief, "your comedy centers around traditional family values and small-town life. Do you ever worry that might feel outdated to younger audiences?" Leanne's smile wavered just slightly. "I don't think love, family, and community ever go out of style," she said evenly. "My stories come from where I'm from, but the emotions, love, laughter, chaos, those are universal. Whether you're in Tennessee or New York, raising a family's messy and funny, no matter where you do it." Andy nodded, but there was a flicker of provocation behind his calm. "Right, but don't you think with your growing platform, you have some responsibility to acknowledge that not everyone fits into that traditional family mold you celebrate so much? Some might say your comedy excludes people." The air shifted. The laughter from the audience softened into uneasy silence. Leanne straightened in her chair. "Andy, I'm not trying to exclude anyone. I talk about my life, my husband, my kids, my neighbors. That's what comedians do. I'm not making statements about how other people should live. I'm just telling my truth." "But that's exactly my point," Andy pressed, his tone sharpening. "When you constantly present one kind of family as the source of your humor and joy, it can sound like you're saying that's the right way to live. Especially since you've made comments before about traditional values being under attack." Leanne's eyes hardened. The friendly sparkle was gone. "I never said traditional values were under attack," she replied, her southern warmth replaced by quiet steel. "I said they matter to me, to my family. There's a difference between loving your own values and attacking someone else's." Andy didn't back down. "But Leanne, let's be honest. Your entire brand is built on being that wholesome mom from Tennessee. You talk about marriage, gender roles, homemaking. At what point do we admit that traditional often means exclusive?" That's when something in Leanne snapped. "Andy, I need you to stop right there," she said, her voice calm but cutting. The studio froze. "You're twisting everything I've ever said into something it's not. And I'm not going to sit here and let you paint me as some judgmental person just because I talk about my family." Andy blinked, startled by her sudden edge. "Leanne, I'm not trying to twist anything. I'm asking legitimate questions about the impact of your messaging." "Messaging?" Leanne repeated, her voice rising. "See, that's your problem, Andy. I don't have messaging. I have stories. I have a life. I talk about what's funny to me. My kids' dirty socks, my husband forgetting the trash, my mother-in-law's casserole disasters. I'm not running for office. I'm telling jokes." The audience was utterly still. Andy pressed on, clearly not realizing he'd crossed a line. "But when you make those jokes about traditional families, Leanne, that is a statement whether you intend it or not. People can feel excluded by it." Leanne gave a small, incredulous laugh. "Excluded? You know what actually excludes people, Andy? Telling them their experiences don't matter unless they fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. That's exclusion." "That's not what I'm saying," Andy interjected quickly, his confidence faltering. "Then what are you saying?" Leanne shot back. "Because it sounds like you're saying that because I love my husband and my kids and I talk about it on stage, I'm somehow responsible for how other people feel about their own lives. That's not comedy. That's you looking for a fight." Andy tried to recover his footing, smiling nervously. "I'm just asking tough questions, Leanne." "No," she interrupted sharply. "You're not asking questions, you're accusing. You're taking something good and warm and twisting it to make controversy. And that's not fair." A stunned silence fell over the set. Leanne's tone had changed completely, no longer light or charming, but firm, unyielding. "I came here to talk about laughter and family," she said, standing now. "And somehow you turned it into a lecture about inclusion and politics. I don't do that kind of comedy. I don't tear people down. I make them laugh." Andy's eyes widened. "Leanne, wait." But she was already unhooking her mic. "No, Andy, I'm done. You wanted a headline? You got one. She walked off set without another word. The studio stayed silent for several seconds before Andy finally turned to the camera, forcing an awkward smile. Well, he said, his voice faltering slightly. That was unexpected. What started as a lighthearted promotional chat quickly turned into one of the most unexpected confrontations ever seen on late-night television. Andy Cohen leaned forward, his expression serious but measured. I think you're misunderstanding the broader conversation here, he said. There's a difference between celebrating your own life and presenting it as the ideal everyone should aspire to. Leanne Morgan's brows lifted, her tone suddenly cool. And when exactly did I do that, Andy? Show me one time, just one, where I said everyone should live like me. Show me one joke, one story, one moment where I told anyone else how to run their life, their family, or their relationships. The audience went dead silent. The air between them thickened as Andy hesitated, clearly searching for an example that didn't exist. It's not always about explicit statements, Leanne, he finally said, his voice less certain now. Sometimes it's about the overall narrative you're creating. Leanne blinked slowly. The overall narrative I'm creating, she repeated, her southern cadence now carrying an edge. Let me tell you something about narratives, Andy. She sat forward, her tone sharpening with each word. For years, I played tiny clubs where nobody knew my name. I told stories about feeling like a failure as a mother, about my marriage barely holding together, about wondering if I was good enough at anything. I made people laugh by sharing my insecurities, my flaws. That's what connected us. Her voice grew stronger, almost trembling with conviction. I never once claimed to have it all figured out or to be living some perfect life people should copy. I just told the truth, the messy, hilarious human truth. And now you're telling me that's harmful, that being honest about my own life somehow creates a toxic narrative. Andy shifted in his seat, his practiced composure beginning to crack. But surely you understand, he said carefully, that when someone with your platform celebrates certain lifestyles, it can feel like an endorsement of those choices over others. Leanne stared at him, the warmth in her face replaced by something colder, steadier. Andy, do you even hear yourself right now? She asked. You're basically telling me I can't love my own life out loud because it might make someone else feel bad about theirs. Do you realize how backwards that sounds? I'm not saying you can't love your life, Andy said, faltering. I'm saying there's a way to do it that doesn't marginalize other people's experiences. Leanne let out a breathless laugh, part disbelief, part exhaustion. Marginalize? Andy, I tell jokes about burning dinner, missing PDA meetings, and begging my husband to fix the garbage disposal. I talk about my life being held together by duct tape and prayer. How is that marginalizing anyone? The room was frozen. Andy looked down, then back up. But Leanne didn't let up. You know who I perform for? She continued. Truck drivers, teachers, nurses, single moms, factory workers. Folks who are just trying to get through the week with a little laughter. Those are my people. That's my community. Her voice dropped to a firm, unwavering calm. And now you're telling me that my stories, their stories, don't count because they don't fit into your version of what's acceptable. Andy opened his mouth, but no words came. The studio lights hummed. Cameras rolled. The crowd sat in stunned silence as Leanne leaned back, unflinching. You invited me here to talk about comedy, Andy, she said quietly. But somewhere along the way, you turned it into a sermon about what I'm allowed to laugh about. I think that says a lot more about you than it does about me. And with that, Leanne Morgan stood up, gave a polite nod to the audience, and walked off the set, leaving Andy Cohen staring into the camera, visibly shaken as the control room scrambled to cut to commercial. Andy raised his hand slightly, his tone softening. Leanne, I wasn't trying to attack your values. But her voice came back low and razor sharp, the kind of quiet that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Andy, she said evenly, you've spent the last 15 minutes dismantling everything I stand for, and you've done it while pretending to just ask questions. You questioned my integrity, my impact, and even my right to talk about my own life without apologizing for it. She stood up. The movement was so sudden that half the studio crew froze, uncertain if they should step in. The mic pack clipped to her blazer glinted under the hot studio lights as she turned toward Andy. You know what the real problem is here, Andy? She asked, her tone calm but cutting. It's not that I celebrate traditional values or that I tell stories about small-town life. The real problem is that you've surrounded yourself with so many people who think exactly like you do, that you've forgotten there's an entire world out there that doesn't revolve around your perspective. Andy, visibly rattled, stayed seated but straightened in his chair. Leanne, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. Leanne let out a short, humorless laugh. Rationally, Andy? There's nothing rational about what just happened. You invited me here to talk about my comedy special, and instead you put me on trial for the crime of being happy with my life choices. I was asking legitimate questions about the cultural impact of your work, Andy said, his voice weaker now, his confidence slipping. No, you weren't, Leanne snapped. You were looking for a moment, something you could twist into a headline. You weren't after a conversation. You were after content. The accusation hit hard. Andy opened his mouth to reply, but stopped when he saw the look on her face, a look that made it clear she wasn't just angry. She was disappointed. You know what's really sad about this? Leanne said softly. I came here excited. I thought this would be fun, a little talk about family comedy, finding joy in the chaos of life. But instead, you turned it into an interrogation about whether my happiness is somehow offensive. She began unhooking her microphone, the motions slow and deliberate. Andy, I've built my career on laughing at real life. I've shared my failures, my insecurities, my struggles, and yes, my blessings too. I've always been honest about what works for me and my family, but I've never said it had to work for everyone else. She held the mic pack in her hand, now looking down at it for a moment before continuing. Apparently, in your world, that kind of honesty is dangerous. Apparently, being happy in a traditional marriage is something that needs to be questioned or dissected. Apparently, we're only allowed to celebrate our own lives if we apologize for them first. Andy stood up slowly, realizing too late that the interview had slipped completely out of his control. Leanne, I think you're overreacting. These are important conversations our society needs to have. Leanne tilted her head, her expression turning incredulous. Our society? Andy, you don't speak for our society. You speak for your audience, your bubble. And that's fine. But don't pretend it's the world. She stepped toward his desk, her voice steady, unshaken. You want to know what I think our society really needs? We need people who can be genuinely happy without apologizing for it. People who can celebrate their own choices without tearing down someone else's. People who understand that there's room in this world for all kinds of families, all kinds of values, and all kinds of stories. She placed the microphone pack gently on his desk with a soft click. But most of all, she said, we need fewer people who think their job is to police other people's happiness, to shame folks for living lives that don't fit some approved script of what's acceptable. Leanne took a breath, her voice softening now. Not angry, but weary. I came here to talk about laughter, Andy, but instead, you reminded me why so many people are afraid to be honest about their lives. You reminded me why people feel like they have to hide what they believe. Not because they're ashamed, but because they're tired of being attacked by people who preach tolerance while practicing judgment. Andy stood frozen behind his desk. Unable to respond, Leanne looked at him one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. So, thank you for the reminder. And with that, she turned and walked off stage. The audience sat stunned. Andy glanced toward the control booth, his face pale under the lights. No one moved. No one spoke. The sound that finally broke the silence wasn't applause or laughter. It was the quiet thud of Leanne Morgan's mic pack still vibrating faintly against the desk, echoing louder than anything Andy Cohen could have said next. Leanne steadily, thank you, Andy. You just reminded me exactly why my comedy matters so much to the people who come to my shows. They're hungry for someone who'll tell them it's okay to love their lives, even if those lives don't fit someone else's idea of what's progressive or enlightened. She turned toward the studio exit. The audience could feel the ending, the kind of quiet triumph that leaves a mark. But before she could push the door open, Andy called out, Leanne, wait. You're walking away from an important conversation. Leanne stopped, her hands still on the door handle. Slowly, she turned back, a faint, incredulous smile touching her lips. An important conversation? She stepped forward again, each word measured, deliberate. Andy, you don't want a conversation. You want a confession. You want me to admit that my happiness somehow hurts other people? You want me to apologize for loving my life? A murmur rippled through the audience. Leanne glanced at them, her eyes fierce and alive. You know what an important conversation would actually sound like? It would be about why we've reached a point in this country where someone can't share their joy without being accused of causing someone else's pain. It would be about why so many people feel like they can't talk about their faith, their families, their values without being labeled as backwards, hateful, or dangerous. She gestured toward the audience, many now nodding, eyes wide, some even misty. These are good people. They work hard. They love deeply. They build communities and raise families. But instead of celebrating that, our culture tells them to be quiet, that their happiness isn't the right kind of happiness. Andy stood frozen. His expression, once smug, was now pale and uncertain. Andy quietly. That's not what I was trying to do. Leanne firmly. Then what were you trying to do, Andy? Because from where I'm standing, it looked a lot like shame. You were trying to make me feel small for being proud of my choices, for finding humor and beauty in a life you've decided isn't enlightened enough. The tension in the studio was electric. Every light seemed to hum louder. You talk about inclusion and tolerance. But your version of inclusion doesn't seem to include people like me. Your version of tolerance doesn't tolerate those who find joy in tradition. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but emotion. Do you know how many women have come up to me after my shows, tears in their eyes, thanking me for reminding them it's okay to be proud of being a mom? Do you know how many couples have told me my jokes about marriage helped them remember why they fell in love in the first place? She blinked back tears, but didn't look away from the cameras. These people felt like their lives didn't matter anymore, like their happiness was something to hide. And through laughter, I helped them remember there's nothing wrong with loving the life you've built, even if it's not trending on social media. Andy looked down, speechless. So, when you sit here and question my work, when you imply that celebrating traditional values is somehow harmful, you're not just criticizing me. You're insulting every person who's ever felt seen, understood, or validated by my words. You're telling them that their joy is less worthy than someone else's. Leanne took a deep breath and turned toward the camera. Her voice softened, but her conviction only grew. I won't apologize for that. I won't apologize for finding beauty in family, for celebrating love that lasts, for making people laugh about the chaos and grace of everyday life. And I absolutely will not apologize for being happy. She turned back to Andy. One final look, steady and cutting. You want an important conversation, Andy? Then start with an honest one, with yourself. Ask why someone else's happiness feels like a threat to you. Because that says a lot more about you than it does about me. Leanne turned, walked toward the exit, and this time didn't stop. The audience rose in stunned silence. Andy Cohen stood frozen behind his desk, the lights glaring down on him, producers whispering frantically off camera. The door closed behind Leanne with a quiet, final click, the sound of dignity walking out and truth staying behind.